FantastiCon. Hello, Danuta. Yes, I am a little bit magical because I actually knew you were going to ask that question. This obviously isn't a live broadcast, unfortunately. As you can see and hear from this little monkey behind me, this is the sad reason that I'm not able to be with you today, because Cappy has fractured his shoulder. He's hardly limping now, but that's because he's been a week, or 2 weeks nearly now, without being allowed to walk anywhere, to jump anywhere. Only just sort of like that height, so he's not doing any big leaps. And that is hopefully going to see his shoulder mended, because he's got a fractured shoulder, haven't you? Say hello to FantastiCon, everybody. Say hello to FantastiCon, Cappy. Hello, FantastiCon. Anyway, this is why I can't be with you today, and I dearly, dearly wish that I could, for many reasons. Number one, I'm going to miss you all. It's the one event I look forward to going to each year. Number two, he's driving me crazy, literally. It's so hard listening to him yowling and complaining. He's very much an outdoor cat, and he wishes that he was outside as much as I wish he was outside. Number three, cleaning out the cat litter tray. Not a nice thing to do. But anyway, sadly I can't be with you, so I have pre-recorded this. And Danuta, I knew you were going to ask questions about why we write things. And for me, magic, I'm a scientific person. And, technology, science, things that make sense. Not religion and magic and all the rest of it. But I've always been a lover of the idea of magic and magical creatures and magical people. And for me, I really wanted to create a science behind magic. Number one, so it's not a sort of an endless resource. So when your protagonists get into a spot of bother, they can't just like wave a wand and fix everything, because that would make for a really boring story. So I wanted it to be a finite resource, and I wanted it to be a scientifically believable thing to be able to create magic. So that's one of the sort of key themes running through this book, Bookkeeper's Guide to Practical Sorcery, which came out last year. And I think a lot of you already own it. And I want to give you a reading now from, it's into chapter 6, when the first time that our hero, Henry, casts a magical spell, and the science behind that. So I've actually prepared a backing music track. I was going to read it to you live, so I have prepared a music track. As you know, those of you who've watched my readings before, you know I like to do this. When I was speaking to Dan about creating this recording, I was like, I can lay the music track in afterwards. It'll make it much easier. But actually, I feel like I should challenge myself to deliver the exact performance that I would deliver to you were I live in front of you. Obviously, sans several beers, but hopefully you'll all be drinking beers for me. And will enjoy yourselves. So I'm going to attempt now. He's going to sleep on the floor. So I'm going to attempt to give you the reading. I need to press play on VLC and then start. So I hope you will enjoy. Henry remembered the first time he'd put on his wizardly garb. He'd been none too impressed at the start. The robe, being made of pure unlined wool, was intolerably scratchy. It was also far too long for Henry. Apparently they didn't make robes for such slightly built young accountants, so he had to hitch it up almost 1.5 feet with a leather belt at the waist. He looked more like a sack of apples than a wizard. On its own, this wouldn't have been too bad. But then there was the hat. What was all that about? It made him look ridiculous. So he challenged Halcyon about the necessity for such an old-fashioned get-up in this modern day and age. "Look, it's tradition, okay?" the old wizard had replied. "If you don't wear those uncomfortable woolen robes, you'll have nothing to look forward
forward to when you become a fully qualified wizard? Other than the obvious benefits of knowing lots of powerful spells to fight evil and enhance your quality of life, of course. But why the robe at all? Can't I just wear my normal clothes? Henry was plucking at the spiky cloth cinched in tight at his hips. Trust me, Henry. The robe is an essential. First of all, for recognition. A good wizard only uses magic as a last resort, and if the bad guys can't see you're a wizard, how are they supposed to know they should surrender? Plus, if you ever do find yourself in a tight spot, it's a lot easier getting your wand out of a specially tailored fold in your robes than an awkward little jacket pocket. Henry scratched his irritated armpit, eyeing Halcyon's slick silken robes with envy. And the hat? He muttered crossly. I mean, really, I look like I've just stepped out of a circus ring. Only because of society's perception. Things have changed. Through all of this, you must remember that, Henry. There was a time when that particular pointed accessory would have commanded a devastating amount of respect for its wearer. And with good reason, too. Oh, so it's like a status symbol, is it? Kind of a my hat's bigger than your hat thing? Henry straightened his back and stopped raking fingernails across his prickly ribcage so he could assume what he hoped was an imposing stance. No, Halcyon looked at Henry like he was reconsidering the apprenticeship. It has a much more meaningful purpose than that. Although it does make one easier to spot in a crowd, it's true. The hat actually works as a hypostatic flux enhancer, affording a percentile increase in the wearer's potential for magic by the sum of the rim circumference multiplied by the height of the total hat. It's not essential, of course, but you'll never win a magical standoff if you have a bare head, no matter how good you are. His words hit Henry like a barrage of illogical lemmings, throwing themselves to their death in the raging torrent of his confusion. Halcyon noticed the young man's intellect was flailing, so he threw it a flimsy rope of rationalisation. It's really very simple, he lectured, snatching the hat off Henry's head and turning it over to illustrate. The inside of the cone is lined with an enchanted weave made mostly out of magnesium phosphate and dragonfly wings, only discarded ones, naturally, which, once placed on the head of a person who is casting a spell, creates a powerful anti-stasis vortex, thereby increasing the brain's proactive activity by an amount proportionate to the cubic volume of the cone. Okay? Henry continued to look blank. Look, it works in exactly the same way as it would increase the volume of your voice were you to snip off the tip of the hat and put the resulting hole up to your mouth before you spoke. The old wizard held the conical hat to his lips like a trumpet to demonstrate. The penny was finally dropping inside Henry's whirling head. Oh, it's like a brain power magnifier then. Halcyon sighed deeply. If you must, yes, like a brain power magnifier. Now, can we move on? The robes still itched like crazy, and the hat, once removed, left an explosion of melon-shaped hair bouncing around on top of his head for almost half the morning. But when he was wearing them now, he felt like a wizard, and never more so than when he was casting a spell. Henry remembered the first time he'd done that more clearly than any other event in his life so far. It had been during the second week of his studies with the old magician, the first week having been devoted entirely to basic theory and boring lectures about health and safety. Okay, Halcyon had said after Henry had completed a particularly nasty multiple-choice test about the magical properties of a bushwinkle fruit. I think you're ready to move on, young man. Go and fetch your wand, will you? On hearing this, Henry jerked his head up in total surprise. He hadn't been allowed to even touch the wand since it had first sent its supernatural energy surging through his veins. And to be perfectly honest, he'd been dying to give it a proper test drive. Well, now apparently that day had arrived. He dashed into the little back room where he kept all his stuff to retrieve the long wooden box. When he returned, he found Halcyon seated in the solid oak table by the window, brushing great mushrooming plumes of dust from the covers of a huge ancient book, the like of which Henry had never seen before. The binding was of tattered and faded red leather, with broken gold lettering embossed across the front saying, "The Complete Book of Practical Spells and Incantations, Volume 2. He sat silently in the chair opposite the old man, coughing slightly, as an unruly crowd of dust particles made their way up his nostrils and tickled the back of his throat. Halcyon thumbed busily down the index at the back of the book, and finally found the page number he was looking for. "Ah, there you are." He flipped the book open towards the middle and began rifling the bottom corners of the pages, counting them away in blocks until he found the right one. 3,814. There we are, perfect. He looked up at his wide-eyed student and spun the book around so that Henry could read the text. The Lifting Charm. This Class 15 spell can be used to facilitate the lifting and carrying of objects otherwise too heavy to be moved by hand. All spells are classified according to their power rating, Halcyon explained as Henry took in the details of the enchantment. From the most harmless and well-meaning ones like this at Class 15, all the way up to a life-threatening or death-defying hex at Level 1. But we won't be moving on to those until I know you can shoot straight. Henry read down the list of ingredients that went into making the potent. Essential ingredients: 1 cup limpweed extract, 1 grain feather salt, 1 generous sprig of garden parsley. He looked up at his mentor, eager to begin. "Now," said Halcyon matter-of-factly, "I've prepared your wand for you ahead of time. We can worry about the charging process at a later date. Have you been doing your daily meditation exercises? Otherwise, you're in for another rough ride at the hands of your wand, I fear." Henry nodded vigorously. He'd followed every one of Halcyon's instructions to the letter. He meant to stick to his word about being the best wizarding apprentice anyone had ever seen. Right. Well, those exercises should help bring the powers of your mind and spirit into tune with the magic inside your wand, rather than the two forces just simply colliding willy-nilly with each other, which is, I think, what you experienced before. Willy-nilly. Right, Henry was nodding. Halcyon frowned. When you grasp the wand, remember to relax and breathe evenly. Don't fight it. Your magic will naturally want to merge with the wand, so just let it flow freely from your body. My magic? Henry was concerned. He'd never done anything magical in his life. What if he didn't have any in him? From my body? He looked down at his slim body swamped in deep blue material. Well, of course from your body, boy. How else did you think it was coming? By carrier pigeon from Bankaloo Bay? I thought the ingredients. You know, the limpweed and parsley. Never heard of magical parsley, Halcyon scoffed. No, boy. The potent merely flavours the magic so that it behaves in a certain way. It forms the magic from inside you into a spell, which are both entirely different things, incidentally. Surprising how few people know that. What if I don't have any? I never felt any magic in me before, Halcyon. We all have it, son. Every living creature does. Apart from those who forgot it, but we'll cover that later. Wizards of old had to soak rocks in their potents to absorb the spell-casting property, and then toss them at a target to cast it. That was a violent period in wizarding history, I can tell you. The discovery of the Malvern tree made things a lot more civilized. I can tell you. I can imagine. Now, once you are holding the wand and it has settled down, you must try to connect with its energy and let your magic flow gently through your fingertips, whereupon it will travel along the length of your wand towards the tip, gathering the properties it requires to turn it into a spelling force as it goes. Then do exactly like you've been practicing with a wooden spoon. Flip the ball of magic towards the subject of your spell. Henry glanced down at the box nervously, recalling the overwhelming burst of energy that had racked his body last time he picked up the wand. He tried to relate that experience to the relaxing sequence of breathing and flipping exercises he'd been practicing whilst gripping the handle of his mother's wooden spoons. Noticing his look of concern, Halcyon placed a soothing hand on his forearm. "Don't worry, I've discharged all the magical potency that was left in the wand from before. There's only a tiny portion of lifting charm left in the bark now, so the worst it could do is stick something quite light up onto the ceiling for a while. Just try to avoid anything shiny. There's a different surface for a reflective casting spell." Somewhat reassured, Henry reached forward and slipped the tiny clasp on the box to the side. Like before, invisible hinges made the box lid jump up on one side, so he inserted his finger and tipped it all the way open. The highly polished Malvern stick was lying on its plush velvet bed, looking all innocent. He paused for a moment, going through the calming breathing exercises Halcyon had taught him. As he sucked air in and out in long, easy sighs, he began to feel a faint tingling sensation starting in the tips of his fingers. Once he felt a little steadier, Henry slowly curled the fingers of his right hand around the thicker end of the stick. The instant his fingers closed on the wand, he felt that sickening rush of power connecting his stomach to the wand. It was like taking the reins of a headstrong stallion. Henry's brain started filtering through these strange sensations, trying to make sense of them. But it had been decades since the Malvern stick was last allowed to do its thing, so it wasn't feeling very patient. It jumped sharply up out of the box and swung itself through the air until it was standing poised at a 45-degree angle to Halcyon. It hung in the air at the end of Henry's arm, quivering with anticipation. "Okay," soothed the old wizard, taking a nervous step backwards. "That's okay. You're obviously still feeling a little tense, which is quite natural. You'll find that little blighter will get easier and easier to handle the more you manage to relax. It can sense your nervousness, just like a horse will bolt with an unsteady rider if it has a mind to. It's a cheeky little one, that one, but I'm rather fond of it. Learn to be in control of it, Henry, and before you know it, you'll be using it as if it were an extension of your own arm. Happy?" Henry nodded vigorously again, forcing his breath to continue in long, rhythmic sighs as his heartbeat gradually slowed to a normal-ish pace. It was a good tussle, but eventually the wand had to admit that it couldn't actually do anything particularly magical without the help of a wizard, even a trainee wizard. In fact, if it were honest, it would have to confess that if Henry decided to uncurl his fingers right now, it would have no choice but to fling itself on the ground with a clatter and lie there, just being a stick. This decided, the pair began to relax a little. As they did, Henry became aware of a change in the sensation of electricity coursing through his body. The angry, excitable sizzle was becoming an exhilarating buzz, somewhat similar to that which the butterflies in his stomach were prone to causing at moments of great excitement, only much more intense. He could practically feel the air about him fizzing as he continued to breathe deeply, willing the connection between himself and his wand to strengthen and become stable. Finally, he felt the wild, quivering thing in his hand begin to respond. Henry was mesmerised by its beauty. It really was a splendid-looking stick. After a few moments, Halcyon coughed politely, so Henry dragged his eyes away from it and looked expectantly up at him. "Okay, you two seem to be making friends. That's That's good. What I want you to do is assume a steady position like this. The wizard grabbed a fork from the table and held it out in front of him, planting his feet in a wide stance and raising his free arm out to the side for balance. He looked a bit like a fencer readying for a lunge. Henry mimicked Halcyon's stance. Now, can you see the short verse printed just below the spell description? That's it. The words work like a mini meditation to help you focus your energy on the task at hand and let your wand know what you're up to. It's a question of good manners as much as anything else, but also vital when you start storing the potence for more than one spell in a wand. You don't have to speak them out loud, though it might help the first few times you try it. But you and the wand are intrinsically linked now. As long as you stay in regular contact with it, it will always know what you're thinking. Henry raised an eyebrow. Might be time to start moderating his thoughts. Ideally, you should be the only one to hold it from now on, too. You'll find the bond between you grows stronger the more you get to know each other. Using another wizard's wand will not only confuse the poor little blighter, but in truth it's rather impolite. Henry nodded sagely. There was no way anyone was taking his wand off him now. Right, now I want you to decide what you're going to lift. Perhaps one of the logs over there by the fireplace. When you're ready, begin to repeat the words of the incantation. You should see a small ball of yellow light gather about the tip of your wand. It'll take you longer to release the energy at first, so don't worry if it doesn't seem to be working immediately. Just keep going. Henry picked out one of the logs lying in a heap by the fire grate and then looked back down at the ancient lettering in the book and began to mumble the mystical words. At first, nothing happened, but as he started to repeat the verse for a third time, Henry felt the tingling in his fingertips beginning to increase. The invisible bond between his hammering heart and the powerful stick seemed to be pulling itself taut, like the elastic of a slingshot being readied for an attack. The wand quivered. A fourth time through the verse, and the sensation in his fingers intensified. Then his eyes widened incredulously, and he saw impossibly fine drifts of light beginning to trickle out of the pores at the end of his fingers. Fine, glowing white wisps licked their way up the sides of the wand, gradually taking on a yellow hue as they neared the tip, where they tangled together to form a bright yellow ball of light. Henry blinked, just to make sure it wasn't his imagination, and then looked back excitedly towards Halcyon, who nodded at his young apprentice approvingly. "Very good, Henry," he encouraged. "I've yet to see anyone master that art so quickly. You're a natural." This made Henry glow almost as brightly as the spell, which was now a tight ball of golden light about the size of a pea. Halcyon watched his student proudly. "Pretty soon you'll be releasing your magic so precisely that the spell will seem to pop into existence on the tip of your wand the moment you've thought about it. And obviously very useful if you ever find yourself in a magical shootout. I've seen many a powerful wizard brought down by lesser magic because they weren't quick enough on the draw. But again, that's all a long way down the line for you, my boy." Henry squinted at the pulsating yellow ball on his wand. "Right," said Halcyon, stepping away from him. "All you have to do now is fire it off towards the target. Okay? Just a quick flick of the wrist like I showed you with the wooden spoon." Henry turned his undivided attention towards the wand. He flipped his eyes towards the fireplace to sight the hapless log once more, and then jerked his hand forward with a flowing movement of the wrist before snapping it sharply back. The ball of light remained resolutely clinging to the end of the stick. Henry frowned. "Try again, Henry, with a little more authority. You have to take control of the spell." Henry sighted the log across the room again, then performed the flicking action with the business end of his wand. This time the yellow pea of light stretched out and away from the end of the wand for about 1.5 inches, before recoiling smartly back into place like a clingy child, refusing to leave its mother's arms. Again, Henry frowned, winding himself up for a more vigorous third attempt to launch the spell. This time, he succeeded, jerking his hand back with enough force to dislodge the glowing orb, which promptly fled away from the tip of the wand like a startled rabbit. Henry watched it go with wide-eyed amazement. He'd cast his very first spell, and it felt great. There was no stopping him now. There was also no stopping the spell, which Henry realised with some dismay had been knocked off target by the additional effort it had taken to release it. He watched apprehensively as the angry little pea of light streaked across the shadowy room towards the fireplace, quite unsure where it might end up. But the pea knew exactly where it was going. It went careering into a large brass plate resting against the wall, whereupon it rebounded and continued its careering path straight towards the old wizard by Henry's side. "Look out!" Henry shouted as he realised where the light ball was headed. But Halcyon's arthritic old bones couldn't possibly move him fast enough to avoid the approaching spell. It hit him on his left hip with a billow of emerald cloth before dissipating into his silky green robes with a shimmer. The robes, now enchanted by the magical properties of a lifting charm, did exactly that. They lifted themselves smartly upwards and over the man's head, floating away until they were pressed against the whitewashed expanse of the ceiling. Halcyon was left standing in the middle of the room, wearing nothing but his faded red long johns and a tall, pointy hat. Henry tried to suppress a snort of amusement. "Sorry," he offered lamely. Yes, well, your aim needs a little work, but the basic principles are in place. Now you can wipe that smirk off your face and get back into your ordinary clothing. Lessons for today are over. I need find something else to wear. It'll be a good 10 minutes before that wretched spell is worn off and my robes come back down to earth." 5 minutes later, Henry came back into the main chamber room, buttoning up his sombre accountant's jacket and desperately trying to tame the explosion of hat hair jiggling around on top of his head in a most unaccountant-like way. He was grinning from ear to ear as he approached the table where Halcyon sat, wrapped in an old curtain, staring impatiently up at his bobbing robe. "Wow, that was incredible. I could feel the power coming from right down deep inside me. It was like... Henry faltered, searching for the right analogy. "Well, it was like nothing else on earth." "Yes, very astute," Halcyon replied sarcastically, still miffed about his floating attire. Henry admired the ancient spell book. "So, when do I get one of those? A spell book?" he asked as casually as possible. "Not for a very long time, Henry. You'll have to be proved fully proficient in the art of accurate spell casting before you can be granted access to such a powerful collection of potents and incantations. This book contains details of every magical discovery that ever has been, as well as some very tasty recipes. There are exams to pass. You'll have to perform perfectly in your casting test, not to mention an intense psychological evaluation to make sure you're the right sort. You can't just get one of these things out of a Christmas cracker, you know. Their distribution is regulated by very bureaucratic people. But we'll cover all that in the coming weeks, I'm sure." Halcyon trailed away vaguely as he watched Henry run his fingers covetously across the tattered, dusty binding of the book. "The spells in this book must be older than time itself," he mused as he stroked it. "Volume 2. I wonder what volume it's up to now." "Volume 2, Halcyon informed him matter-of-factly. "But this book looks ancient. Surely there must have been new spells since it was made. What about all the modern discoveries in the world of spellcasting? Dr. Hyperbole said that his memory enhancer had recently been added, so I thought..." "And it has," the old man interrupted. The publishers distribute regular update spells to all the registered owners on record, and the book rewrites itself. Ingenious when you think about it. In all of time since the beginning of magic, there has only ever been one spell book. Apart from that cheap and tacky Idiot's Guide thing by Blanco, but I hardly think that counts. Insufferable old fool. Having just one spellbook saves a lot of confusion, you know. And apart from anything else, it's great news for the trees, considering how many pages there are in a volume and how frequently magic changes. Ah, but there must have been more than one spellbook at one time. Otherwise, why did they call it Volume 2? Henry challenged, feeling quite pleased with himself. That was a misprint, Halcyon countered simply. And at that moment, the whitewashed ceiling finally gave up its hold on his silky emerald robes, and they flumped onto the floor in a crumpled heap. The end. What do you think, Cappy? Did you enjoy that? Not particularly. So I'm sorry about the added background ambience, everybody. This little tinker, that's what he does when I'm not paying him attention. If I'm here and he's not asleep and I'm not paying him attention, he yowls and yowls and yowls and yowls and yowls. And this is why I have to be with him. Did you see him trying to get out of the window? You're such a naughty little tinker. So I really am genuinely gutted that I can't be with you. I know that my hammers are all there representing me, so thank you so much to my wonderful hammers. I know that the Sovereignty are going to be there in force. I think I might have dodged a bullet on the revenge stakes from DJ and the crew, but I'm sure that will come to fruition at some point. Dan, I hope that you're having an amazing time, and Gabby, I hope that you guys are managing to enjoy yourself and that everything is running smoothly. I'm going to go and sort this thing out with a bit more attention. But have a great time, everybody. Happy FantastiCon. I look forward to hearing all the stories and seeing all the photographs. So in the meantime, please do make sure you go and visit the book stand. You can buy my book if you want, if you haven't already got it. But also, I know that you heard earlier on Danuta interviewing two of the authors who've got book launches. So please do go show them some support. Alex Janaway, The Resistance Book 2, is a brilliant fantasy series. Follows the ongoing adventures of the Book 1 characters. And then you've got Janet Blackwell, The Bridge and the Butterflies, which is a new teenage young adult fantasy. No dragons, but lots and lots to make it very, very special. So good luck with those two authors with your book launches. I hope you all enjoy everything. Thank you to Mad Dog for filling in with the Retro Game Battle hosting for me, which was either yesterday or later today. I don't know. I can't remember what day this is going to be played on. Cappy's currently trying to dig his way out of the carpet, so I am going to go now. But peace to you all. Fly safe, Commanders, and I will see you at the next available opportunity once my cat has healed.